Hi, I'm Roy from Roy's Garage. Today I'm going to be working on a 2015 Toyota Sienna van. It has about 200,000 miles. The front struts are all worn out. When you hit small bumps, it does a lot of rattling. So I'm going to show you how to replace the front struts. Okay, these are the front struts that I'm going to be replacing. You can either buy the strut alone, or you could buy loaded struts with the whole spring assembly. For this particular car at this time, the only thing I could get was just the struts alone. So later on I'm going to show you how to transfer the spring to the new strut. These are the tools that I'm going to be using today for this job. Pry bar, 1/2 inch pipe. I use this to extend my 3/8 ratchet. A punch, hammer, 22mm wrench, water pump plier, 3/8 drive ratchet, 1/4 inch drive ratchet with a extension. This is a 10mm socket, 14mm socket, 12mm socket, a camber gauge, 3/8 drive, 1/2 inch impact wrench, 30mm socket, 22mm, 21mm, and 17mm socket, small screwdriver, vice grip, dielectric grease, some anti-seize, and a steering wheel jack. Okay, this is my Brannick spring compressor. Without this, you can't do the job. So to do this job, I have to remove the 2 wiper arms and this plastic shield right here. So first, we're going to have to pop this cap off. Okay. Then we're going to remove this nut. So we just gotta remove it. Okay. There's these little like tabs over here. You just gotta kind of play around it and then pull it upwards. Okay. So now we're going to be removing this wiper blade assembly. There's an electrical connector over here. You got to press the tab in and pull it. And this is held in with 3 bolts. You got one here, and one in there. So we've got to remove those bolts. there's a rubber grommet over here. What you need to do is slide the whole assembly to my right and then lift it up. And just pull it right out. Okay, I jacked up the car, put it on jack stands. I'm going to be removing the right and left front tire. Okay, so now that I removed the tire, I'm going to need to secure the steering wheel straight. So I'm going to be using this it's a steering wheel jack. Okay. So I'm going to be securing this with 2 nuts so the rotor doesn't move. So I'm going to be putting on this camber gauge right at the top. So there's this bubble over here. I'm going to have to turn this bottom screw and adjust the bubble to 0. Because when I take this thing off, I'm gonna be throwing off the adjustment. So when I put it back, I can adjust it as close as possible to the 0. So that way I can take it to the alignment shop and the tires won't wear out too bad. Okay, I usually like to lubricate the tie rod ends because we're gonna have to remove this. We're gonna have to remove the brake line mount. And then I'm going to have to take off these 2 bolts that bolt the strut to the steering knuckle. Okay, so I'm going to be removing this axle nut. The reason is when I disconnect the strut bolts, this spindle will move outwards. And I don't want this axle to pull out of the joint. So when I loosen this nut, this axle, I can shove the axle inwards so it won't pull out. So on this tool, I'm using a 30mm socket 12-point. That's how this nut is designed. So I'm gonna be removing the sway bar link, the brake line, the mount, and then these 2 strut bolts. What you can do too is try see if you can shake this joint up and down. If it's loose, then you're gonna have to replace the tie rod end. If it's pretty solid, then you can reuse it. In this case, it's solid. Sometimes this rubber boot is broken. This is what seals the joint from water and dirt. When that's broken, then you end up changing the end. So now before we do anything else down here, we're going to have to disconnect the upper strut mount from the body. Okay, so we're going to be removing these 3 bolts that secures the strut to the body. So this screw is a little bit different. But this nut is a little different from the rest. So this nut, put it on the outside of the strut. Okay, what I'm gonna be doing is I'm gonna be jacking up the strut, because on this one it looks like the strut is pulling down, pulling down. So I'm gonna jack it up so I can loosen up, take off this screw. See, now the strut is against the body, so now I can remove the nut. So now I'm gonna be positioning the jack underneath the rotor just to hold it up. Okay, I'm going to be removing these 2 bolts. Then I'm going to separate it like that. Okay, so what I did was I shoved the axle in, because if this axle pulls out, sometimes it can pull out of the joint. Then you get a really hard time putting it back in. So it's a good idea to kind of hold it upwards, because if you don't, sometimes this thing will fall outwards and then it might pull the shaft out. So what I like to do, takes a little more time, but I like to use a tie wire just to hold it from coming outwards. That's good enough. Then now I can remove that one more bolt from the top, then I can remove this whole assembly. Okay, now we can remove the strut. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna be taking this over to my spring compressor, and I'm gonna be transferring the spring and the upper mount to the new strut. Okay, so right now I have to center the strut into this compressor. Okay, so now I have it fully compressed. Now I'm going to be vice gripping the shaft so the shaft doesn't turn while I'm taking off the nut. Wait, now before we do that, let's clamp this guy on so the strut doesn't fall down. Okay, I'm going to be removing the upper mount. Now I can pull out the strut. Okay. So this is the old strut. So I'm going to be transferring this rubber stopper and this spring insulator to the new strut. Sometimes these stoppers, they deteriorate and they fall apart, but you don't need it. So I'm going to be putting on this new strut into the old spring. Okay, so we're going to be putting the bearing on. Then we're going to be putting on the upper mount. With the new nut. Now we can slack the compressor. Now we're going to be installing the new strut assembly. So on this job, you got to have two people, one lifting up the strut while the other one is putting the nuts on the top. Okay, we'll remove the wire. Now we're going to slide the strut into the steering knuckle. Okay, so now we might have to jack up the rotor. Okay, so now gotta put these bolts in. Okay, before we tighten up these two nuts, we gotta tighten up the three nuts on the top first. Okay, now we're gonna be tightening up the three bolts. I'm gonna use this 1/2-inch pipe as an extension on my ratchet so I get a little more leverage so I can make it really tight. So I removed the jack. So what I need to do is, sometimes, you know, this wheel might turn. So what you do is just make sure this thing is at the center on the very top position. That's why I mounted it. Now we're gonna have to make this bubble go to 0 by pushing it in or out. And just make it as the best you can. If you don't have this gauge, it's okay. But I got one, so that way I get it close enough so I can go to the alignment shop without any problems. I'm gonna secure now the brake line and the ABS wire to the strut. Then we're going to secure the sway bar link to the strut. Clip on the ABS, the wire, the plastic mount. Okay. Okay, so now I'm going to be turning this rotor until this slot on the axle faces upwards. Because I'm going to be tightening up the axle nut. And then I'm just going to stake it so it doesn't loosen. That's it. So the next thing to do is put the tire on, road test, and it should be good. Okay, so now I'm going to be putting the tire on. I'm going to be using my pry bar to lift up the tire. You got to kind of line up the hose a little bit, and with the pry bar you just lift it up. So I'm going to be tightening up the wheel nuts. So I'm going to be tightening them up in a crisscross pattern. That way it tightens it evenly. I'm going to use my knees to push against the bottom to hold it up. And from there, I'm going to tighten it up. Okay, we're going to be installing the wiper assembly. So you got to put this rubber grommet right into the slot. Okay. Then we can bolt it up. Some anti-seize, so if you ever have to take it off the next time, a lot easier to take off. But if you don't have any, you don't have to. So we're going to put some dielectric grease right into this electrical connector. slip it in and clip it on. Now we're going to be putting on the plastic shield. Okay, that's it. Okay, now we're going to put on the wipers. Okay, so you got to put it on, kind of eyeball it where this thing is going to land, and you got to kind of wiggle it to go down around there. Got to kind of wiggle it, make sure it goes all the way down around there, and tighten it up. Put the caps on. Okay, we're going to remove the steering wheel jack. Then we'll turn the ignition to the on position. Try your wipers. That's good. Okay. Okay, I road tested the vehicle. Now there's no rattling and it has very good dampening. So if you like my video, please subscribe, press the like button, and I see you in the next video. Aloha.